Hello everyone, I'm Isaac Sievers. Welcome to the August 2022 episode of Onward Lebanon. Onward Lebanon is a television show airing on Lebanon's Channel 6 monthly here in Lebanon, Ohio. We're excited to join you each month throughout the year to talk about things that are happening at Lebanon City Schools, a celebration of our people, our staff, our students, and our programs. I'm Isaac Sievers, and I'm starting my second year as a superintendent of Lebanon City Schools. It's been a great year to spend time getting to know you and the community, to work with our staff, to work with our students, to transition into what's happening at Lebanon City Schools. And I've been encouraged this past year to focus on what unites us, what brings us together beyond the Lebanon Warriors, beyond the maroon and gold, really what happens as we get down to the root of how we operate, how we interact with each other, and we focus on our mission of building community. One of the ways that we work to do that is getting out in the community and meeting with parents, with alumni, civic leaders, business leaders, and beginning to form those conversations about what makes Lebanon special, what are the needs of our district, and how can we partner with the community. And throughout the past year, one of the things I've heard over and over again is how is Lebanon City Schools working to prepare for the growth that's happening in our community? What are we looking at in terms of financial obligations going forward? How do we deal with the growth of the student population? And so we've been in a lot of conversations, a lot of effort in planning on behalf of the Board of Education and our district leadership team to prepare for that. Today, we want to focus this episode today as we look at the finances of operating in our district. How are we doing? What's our financial stability at this point in time? And then looking to the future. How do we grow? How do we make sure we have what we need to make sure we're successful? So I'm going to bring in today to the conversation two folks that exemplify what it looks like to build community. We collaborate regularly with each other. We work to make sure that what's happening inside of our buildings is in great partnership with the city and county today. So today I'm joined by Karen Ervin, our district treasurer. Welcome, Karen. Congratulations on surviving the first year at Lebanon City Schools along with us. Ton of change in the last year and really an opportunity to work together to shape the future. And also our Warren County Auditor, Nolan, resident of Lebanon, a parent of Lebanon City School students, but also our county auditor. And so we just want to talk today a little bit about where things stand with Lebanon City Schools financially, and also looking forward to an operating levy that we have on the ballot come this November. And so just an episode of education, information today, and a look at how do we combat the growth that's happening. It's here, it's coming. We see homes being built all over our community. There's excitement around that, but there's also planning that needs to take place. And so thanks for the two of you for joining me today. We're going to start with Karen. Just can you give me an overview of the district's finances and where we stand right now financially as a district?
Sure. Overall, the district's done a really great job of maintaining a healthy cash balance over the last few years and healthy finances in general. So last year, just as an example, we were able to stay within budget. We received $63 million in our general fund, and we spent $62 million. So we were able to stay within our budget. Our main source of income is primarily property tax. And then our biggest expense is payroll. We serve over 720 people in our employment. So we ended the school year with about $24.5 million in our cash balance. That's roughly 4.5 months worth of operation. So a very healthy place to be.
And I think board policy and board governance over the past several years and previous administrations have worked really hard to make sure we spend within our means. And I think it was we spent time in the last year talking with people in our community. They don't realize we employ over 700 people. I mean, that's a large corporation in many ways. And so I think that service industry, the majority of our expenses are personnel costs, but it takes a lot of people to maintain our facilities, to teach the students, to serve them meals, and drive the 85 buses that we operate every day. So thanks for that. Can you tell us about the district's financial forecast? How do we look as we look into the future?
Sure. So I'm a visual learner, so I brought some visual aids. This is just a copy of our our current forecast. We updated our forecast in May, and really what a forecast does, it just helps us anticipate what's coming down the pike as far as our financial standing. And so if you take a look at this, our revenues will start being surpassed by our expenses in about 2 years. So in about 2 years, our expenses are going to be higher than our revenues. But with maintaining our current income, we will not have to ask for new money for current operations until 2026. So we're doing really well. Back to that comment that we've had a healthy balance. We're doing really well. The community has been gracious. The board has given us great policies. So we're doing really well right now.
And I think it's important for us to understand where things are going, right? That 5-year forecast, it's required by Ohio law. It's something we update twice a year. And we're trying to make decisions then based off of what's this going to do not only right now to impact finances, but as we go forward into the future. So, one of the things we look at as a district as we try to maintain a comparison with other districts is we look at what it costs to operate a district is this cost per pupil. And, so we take the amount of spending we're spending on educational expenses, and we look at how's that spread out across our 5,500 students. And so it's a real simple calculation, how much money we're spending on educational type of expenses. We divide that by the number of students. We look at that cost per pupil, and that's something that the state of Ohio uses to compare us to other school districts in Ohio. And so as we look at that as a benchmark, right, of how Lebanon City Schools is compared to other districts, and what we're spending on education. What's our district cost, our per pupil cost, and then how does that compare with others around the state?
Sure. So if our citizens can go out onto the Ohio Department of Education's website and pull up what's called the District Profile Report. Sometimes we refer to it as the CUP report. The most recent data shows that our current per pupil cost is $11,058. The average per pupil cost for schools in Ohio is $13,386. So we're looking at about $2,300 difference that Lebanon is less. If you look at comparable districts, those are typically about $200 more per pupil than we are right now. So if you do a ranking of every school district in Ohio, there's about 607 districts. We are in the bottom 15% of cost. So we're 528 out of 607. So we're in the lower percentage there.
And I think we utilize that as a district to talk about efficiency in operations. There's a balance, obviously, right? We want to make sure that we're providing the best for our students. We want to make sure that we're doing things in that way. I don't know that we want to hang out in the bottom, 5 to 10% of those numbers. But then we also look at that and we compare it to how we're performing academically. And are we doing good work with the amount of money that we're spending? And so one of the things that we compare to, and one of the reports that Ohio Department of Education puts out is sort of the efficiency costs, right? This cost per pupil, and how does it compare to performance? And so one of the things we just recently started crunching some numbers on last year's state data and assessment report we gave to the board members last month was as we look at performance index, so how well are our students doing on state tests, we're in the 85th percentile. So we are performing better than 85% of the school districts in Ohio. So if you look at how Lebanon City Schools is spending their money, right, we're in the lowest 15th percentile of expenditures per pupil, but we're performing in the 85th percentile of performance per pupil and how that looks. So all in all, right, as a district, making good financial decisions, but still resulting in student growth and student performance. So we continue to work together collaboratively as we make decisions, and so we've added staff in the last couple of years. We've added programs, but we're always doing so this year specifically as we've begun working together. Hey, we need to add 3 teachers. What's that going to do to our budget? What's that going to do to our 5-year forecast? And how does that look? And so all of those decisions are made first and foremost, what's best educationally for our kids and meeting those needs. And then secondly, what's that going to look like in terms of our district finances. So, another question for you, Karen, would be, what's the breakdown of the school's district's income? Where does our revenue come in from? What sources?
So primarily we get property tax revenue. That's 60% of our income. It's a substantial portion of how we operate. Another 32% comes from state funding. So a lot of people have heard of the funding formula. So 32% is from the state. The other 8% is just a random category that includes things like transfers, advances, our interest, rentals, donations. None of these individually account for enough to separate them, and so we just group them all together as 8%.
And then, so along those lines, with 60% of our income coming from local tax dollars, right? Just briefly touch on why it's vital for us to make sure that we continue, to have the local support on our taxes.
Absolutely. So without the 60%, obviously, operations cease to exist as we know them. But specifically on the three emergency levies that we're going to discuss today, I wanted to touch a little bit on those. Those are worth in total $12.2 million. That's about 32% of that 60% that we're talking about. So not only are our property taxes vital, but that emergency levy revenue is vital as well. Without that funding, we have to talk about cuts in services and staff, and ultimately that impacts how we educate our students.
Yeah, so we really can't survive without that $12.2 million annually, and it's something that we've got to continue to go back to our taxpayers for, and we're looking at an alternative option for that now in the substitute levy, and we're going to do some education on that here in a moment as we look to bring Matt into the discussion. But one of the questions we've received a lot, right, is that you're asking, you're funding schools on the backs of the taxpayers. Like, is it possible for us to operate any other way in terms of not asking for tax dollars locally and just surviving on state and federal money in that way?
Unfortunately, that's a short answer, no. Property tax in the state of Ohio is how they've set up the funding. And so if you look at the state funding formula specifically from the CUP report, only about $3,573 is coming per pupil from state funding. And if you remember, our average cost was about $11,000. So there's just no way that we could properly educate our students with just state funding.
Yep. So just one of the things that we've heard this year before we go to the next section of this discussion is, the state legislature in Ohio passed a fair school funding formula, hoping to kind of undo what has been going on since the late 80s, early 90s in terms of the DeRolf case and constitutionality of state funding and addressing some of those inefficiencies. But right now that funding formula is not adequately funded at the state level. So they passed a funding formula. They said this is how we're going to fund schools, and then they didn't put enough money into the funding formula to do that. And so that's an effort that we still continue to work on and fight at the state level. But ultimately, in terms of operating a district locally, this is something that we have to continue to have these discussions about. So right. I'd like to bring in Matt to the discussion, and you look at this as a countywide perspective. Obviously, right. You're a resident of Lebanon and kids in the district, but your job is to look at us across the county and to do those sort of comparisons. So, how do the Lebanon City Schools taxes compare with other school districts in Warren County?
Yeah, Lebanon historically has been in about in the middle of the tax rates, but right now they're almost at the bottom. There's only a couple districts in the whole county that right now are taxed less than Lebanon City Schools. Most are more, and some significantly more. Other schools have employed other taxes, income taxes and other things like that Lebanon hasn't done. So as a taxpayer in Lebanon schools, we're near the bottom of taxpayers in Warren County for our rates right now.
Okay. So a little bit more back and forth now that we're into this section of the discussion. So Karen, can you walk us through the levy that the board has voted to put on the ballot in this November?
Sure. So the board voted to place a substitute levy on the ballot. And a substitute levy, it's a different term than what we're used to hearing, but it really just replaces and combines our existing emergency levies. So the question that we're going to put on the ballot for taxpayers, this is what taxpayers were asking you to evaluate, is whether we should replace the three existing emergency levies. They currently collect about $12.2 million with a single substitute levy that will also collect $12.2 million. So this levy is not an increase to current taxes.
Why are we doing this levy now? Why are we placing it on the ballot now? And is there an opportunity for it to be going later?
Sure. So 2 of our emergency levies are set to expire next year. With that, we needed to decide what we do with those. Because we're bringing to the taxpayers a different type of levy, we wanted to do some education, also get some feedback from our residents. So we're bringing it to the ballot a year early. If it does not pass, if we hear feedback that residents aren't happy with this option, we can come back next year with a different option.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of confusion around, right? These are tax terms, these are legal terms. People hear emergency, they think some things have gone wrong and
Right.
we've got to fix it. Mr. Nolan, from your perspective, can you please explain the term emergency and substitute levy and explain why the district is allowed to combine these?
Sure. I wish they would get rid of the term emergency levy. It doesn't mean anything what people think it means. It legally has to be used because that's what the law says, but it doesn't imply an emergency. It really should be called a fixed sum levy. That's what it is. You're getting X amount of dollars as a school district, and you're going to get that amount no matter what. If the values go up 100%, you still get $12.2 million. So I hate the term emergency. It doesn't imply emergency. It implies that the school needs more money to operate, and they're asking for a fixed sum amount. That's what an emergency levy is. What a substitute does is it takes that same language and it makes it so that as new homes come into a community, that $12.2 million will rise. And as Lebanon is growing at such a fast rate with all of the subdivisions coming on board, as it sits now, every new student that comes in, every new house that gets built, there's still $12.2 million to use. That doesn't work. It doesn't take into consideration inflation. It doesn't take into consideration anything. And so what happens is if these levies aren't substituted, one of 2 things has to happen. A new emergency levy has to go in place, or a bigger operating levy has to go in place. I don't want that as a resident of Lebanon, as a taxpayer of Lebanon. So what a substitute levy does is that it allows for those new homes to get added to the pot. So that $12.2 million will grow slowly as each new house comes on. A little piece from each new house gets added on. So that $12.2 million will go on. It doesn't stop the need for levies ever, but it slows the need for levies.
I think it's part of the discussion we've had as we've heard from communities and folks is, when the new houses are being built, they don't really understand that $12.2 million cap.
Right.
And so they see new houses, they assume we're getting new money and more money on that. And this is a way of looking at it as the new developments come on board, they're going to be paying their fair share because new homes that are being built are bringing new students to our district. And our student enrollment is growing. We've spent some time and resources in the last year looking at, what's the enrollment study going to look like? And if right now, everything is built as it's currently planned and starting to work on, within the next 10 years, it's possible that our district grows by an additional 1,000 students in the next 10 years. We can't take those students on without the opportunity to generate additional income. Things have changed in the construction market in the last several months. We'll see what that looks like, but we need to be able to prepare for that, and this is one way for us to do that as we look forward to the future. So Karen, why did the district choose this type of renewal, and what's the benefit of combining 3 levies into one?
So there are quite a few benefits to opting for a substitute levy. First, as Mr. Nolan talked about, is a fixed sum. We know that we're going to get that same $12.2 million that our current 3 emergencies generate. Also, the 3 emergencies that we have, they're on different voting cycles. So we have every 3rd, 4th, and 5th year, our voters are coming back to the ballot and voting. That's a lot of ballot voting on the same issues. We've been fortunate, our taxpayers have approved the renewals, which has been great, but this substitute levy will reduce the amount of time that we need our voters in the ballot. So they're going to come every 10 years as opposed to every 3rd, 4th, and 5th year. Another benefit is this really provides the district with more stable revenue. So one of the things that I heard a lot in my interview process and coming on board was from staff members, I don't know if I'm going to have a job next year. I don't know if this levy is going to pass. And so the 10-year levy really stabilizes that revenue, and that's a really great thing for us to be able to attract and then retain really quality educators and staff members. So finally, as Mr. Nolan spoke to, this captures the growth. We all know that Lebanon is growing very quickly, and so this helps keep the school liquid as far as being able to cover the additional students that may come on board without overtaxing our current taxpayer base.
Okay. And so one of the questions we've heard as we look at this, and I think every time you put a levy on the ballot, what are you going to be paying for with this money? What's the transparency in terms of how we're currently using the $12.2 million and how we would use this money?
Sure. So our current emergency levies cover our operational budget. The substitute levy is literally replacing those. It will cover the operational budget. So we're talking about staffing, we're talking about instructional needs, and we're talking about maintenance of buildings and facilities. So there will be no changes to how we use the money. It really does cover us. It's vital for our operations.
So Matt, a question here is, how is an operating levy different than a bond issue or permanent improvement?
Sure. So bond issues is a term that we've heard a lot in Lebanon over the years. It's a mortgage. Again, it's a term that they could have made so much simpler for taxpayers. It's a mortgage. And it can only be used for that. Just like the money you set aside, a lot of in your escrow payments to pay your mortgage every year, that's what a bond payment is. And when we vote for a bond levy, that's all it can be used for. We can't use it to pay for new students, new teachers, new bus drivers. It can only be used to pay the payments related to new construction and those types of items. So it's in its own pot, and it's illegal to use it for anything else. So we really have to set those aside from anything related to educating students.
And as a district, we have bond issues going back to the construction of the new junior high, the renovation of Berry Intermediate, and so those things are kept separately, just like our permanent improvement levies. They can't be used for operating. We're talking about a substitute operational levy here, right? That's going to be the day-to-day operations of running our district. So Karen, we don't like to talk about this, right? But what happens if this levy doesn't pass in November? And what happens if the revenue from the 3 emergency levies were allowed to expire in the future?
So if the substitute levy doesn't pass, obviously the board is going to come together. This is vital to our operations, as we said. So they have to come together and decide what does that look like. So there are a lot of different options, from renewing or trying this again next year, all the way to cutting services and staff. So that's the big thing they're going to have to figure out. This does not take away the current taxes of what we're paying. So the current emergency levies will still be in effect until next year when the 2 renew. So we will be doing something again by next year, and if those don't pass, then we have to again come to the board and say, what options do you want to propose?
Yeah. So we hope we don't get to that situation, but as part of the planning, that's part of the reason we're going early with the substitute and trying to educate our community on that. So Matt, let's talk about the 10-year renewal cycle. We've had some questions on the 10 years. What options do we have with a substitute, and what do you see as the benefit for the 10-year renewal cycle here?
Yeah, so I was a big advocate to do the substitute levies, to combine these, to get out of what I call levy fatigue. I've lived in Lebanon a long time. I know, like a lot of you, always feel like you're voting on something, and it's because of this. The way these cycle, the way these emergency levies are set up, they always have to be on the ballot, and they always get renewed 70-30, always. And that's because people know the school needs them. People in this community support our schools. I see the county-wide side of it, which is levies are expensive. We just had elections are expensive. We just had an election Tuesday. That cost a lot of money to this state and this community. So I don't like things going on the ballot solely for the price of putting them on the ballot. I'm in the minority of that. A lot of people like the opportunity to go and vote on things. And so this is kind of a compromise. Substitute levies can be one of 3 things. They can be 5 years, 10 years, or permanent. I'm an advocate for permanent. And permanent's a bit of a bad term because you always have the option to take a levy off. The voters always can go get enough signatures and take a levy off, so we wouldn't have to go in 10 years to renew it. But I think a lot of people like that option. They like to say, in 10 years, we're going to check and make sure you're doing your job right, and if you're not, we're not going to vote for your levy. I've been around a long time. I've seen it happen once in my 20 years in government, and literally hundreds of levies, it's happened once. So I don't think it's going to happen much, but this is a nice compromise place. I think coming back every 5 years puts teachers, administration in a very hard spot to not know if they're going to have funding. Having 10 years, you can say, all right, for the next 10 years, we know we're going to have this funding source. We know we can go forward with it. So I think it's a nice compromise. Like I said, if I was on the board, I would have voted to go permanent. But I completely understand that that's probably a minority view, and that 10 years is a nice middle ground.
So one of the things I just want to point out to our viewers here is that we are trying to educate on this, and we have some information on our website. We've placed a really good infographic on there that looks at the history of these emergency levies, that 3 and that 4 and 5 year terms. And you can see that going back for the last 5 to 6 years, Lebanon City Schools has had a levy renewal or new money on the ballot every year. And that levy fatigue is real. We see that, we feel that. This gives us an opportunity to maybe push that out a little bit and feel like our folks aren't constantly on the ballot and asking to support Lebanon City Schools. So Matt was willing to come and help educate, and I think that I appreciate that about you as an elected official and that resource that you've been for us. And come and educate our board, come and educate what we have as a community audit advisory committee and a group of community members that we've brought together to help shape some of these discussions. So Karen, you just want to talk about that a little bit and how we get input into making decisions.
So our CAC committee is made up of 2 of our board members and then several of our community members who are more financially minded. And they come together at least twice a year, sometimes more, to review the forecasts that I showed earlier today. We kind of discuss what's going on, what's happening, did I miss something, do they have some questions about anything. They're just kind of an oversight to the Treasurer's Office and the work that we do there. We had Mr. Nolan come out and talk about the substitute levy, the options that we had, and they really they jumped on board. They thought that this was the best option for us. Kind of solves a lot of our issues that we constantly hear from people. So they recommended that we place that 10-year substitute ballot to the board as a proposal.
Okay. So, Matt, we look to wrap this up and we kind of look at how does this compare with others has been part of our discussion. You know, from your perspective or looking around the county, have there other schools done this type of levy and combining emergencies before and pursuing substitutes?
All of the above, yeah. Lebanon's kind of honestly one of the last ones to do it. Almost every school district that's had these has moved away from them. This was the idea the legislature had in place. You need to move towards the substitute levies rather than doing the emergency levies over and over and over again. So that's why the legislature created them. The first one was done in Warren County, and we've moved almost all of our emergency levies to substitute levies now.
Okay. So this is not unique. This is not a new thing. It's just going to be new to Lebanon and part of that education that we are responsible for in helping them understand what it looks like. Because of this renewal levy, taxes will not increase. We've talked about that. We've heard that from you. For our current taxpayers, they're going to be generating that $12.2 million. We've received questions about how that can be true, right? And I'm not the auditor, and I don't, pretend to be that. So, can you just talk to us a little bit about, assuring that? How do you ensure that, and how do new developments contribute to the growth, not the current taxpayers?
Yeah, this levy, it's just like the emergency levies that were in place. They never increase unless values decrease. So there's a fixed sum that must be raised, and then every new development adds to that. So it is not the current taxpayers that are paying higher taxes to get that money. It's the new growth that's being added on. So the levy won't go down as fast now, but it will not increase as a result of this. It will just get larger with all of the new developments happening in Turtle Creek Township and in the surrounding areas in Lebanon School District. Every one of those houses is going to add a little bit more to this levy. And commercial buildings. This picks up all the new commercial development as well. None of that was getting picked up by these emergency levies. And so we need to substitute this out if we want to pick up that new value and avoid future levies for longer time.
So we are just extremely thankful for the partnership. I want to thank you for joining us today and talking with us about this. As we look at what it means as a district to truly partner with our community, right, and educating our community on how these things operate and how these things work, we view this as a partnership. We live out the mission of building community. Whether it's inside of our buildings and our programs that we have, whether it's with the communities, the parents, the business people that we engage with on a regular basis. And so as we work through this process in the next several months, we're going to be visible. We're going to be out meeting with the civic groups and having some informational meetings. So we just encourage you to submit questions that you have to us. If we can't answer it, we'll ask the auditor's office. And so as a district, we've created a link on our website. You go to LebanonSchools.org. There's a link to a levy page in the lower left-hand corner of the page there that will provide you with information about the emergency levies. It will also include a frequently asked questions. As these questions come in, we're looking to put the answers back out to our community, making sure that we're transparent in that way. Be looking for some invitations or some news announcements about where you can come and ask us questions directly. We'll be offering some of those over the next several months as well. And I really just want to thank you both for your time. Thanks for your fiscal leadership of the district. What happens in the classroom is not possible unless we have the money to operate the district and to support with the folks around us. And so this is going to conclude our August 2022 episode of Onward Lebanon. I want to thank Joe Hackman and his staff here at Lebanon Channel 6 for their support of Lebanon City Schools, the City of Lebanon for allowing us to have this opportunity to work through their network. And I want to thank you, the viewers, and our community members for your support of Lebanon City Schools and the way that you show up to programs, the way you support our schools, the way that you partner with us to make sure that we're educating our kids and making this a great place to work and to live and to learn. So thank you very much as we sign off. Onward Lebanon, and have a great day.